Greetings to you on this Palm Sunday. My sermon title today is Jesus Entered Jerusalem, and it's based on the text from our processional gospel today from Matthew. I'll read that now. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven." When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" Jim Bonham rode his horse into the Alamo. This little bit of history trivia might seem unimportant in and of itself, but wait until you hear the rest of the story. The year was 1836. The place was Texas. The event was war for Texas independence. A group of 163 Texans were holed up in a mission church called the Alamo. They were surrounded by over 5,000 enemy soldiers. Among the group in the Alamo were James Bowie and Davy Crockett. There was no way that this small group was going to be able to hold off an army of thousands. A brief message was sent out from the Alamo. "The enemy in large force is in sight. We want men and provisions. Send them to us." Several men carried out this message to the neighboring towns. One of the messengers was a man named Jim Bonham. He managed to sneak out 4 days after the Alamo had already been surrounded. Frantically pleading his case at a neighboring town yielded no volunteers. The situation seemed hopeless. Nonetheless, Bonham rode back to the Alamo. In his book, The Alamo, author Walter Lloyd described Bonham's return this way. "And now he was coming back alone over the dark, silent prairie, through the thickets and mesquite trees. Here he could look down on the Alamo less than a mile away. Clearly, the fort was still holding out. Around it on all 4 sides were the Mexican camps, the earthworks, dozens of smoky fires, the troops in their white fatigue suits. As near as he could judge, he was safely between 2 enemy positions. Now to run for it. Digging in his spurs, Bonham swiftly gathered speed, flashed into the open, pounded straight for the Alamo gate by the corral. He hunched low on his horse, making himself small against an unexpected hail of bullets. But the startled Mexicans never fired a shot, and Jim Bonham hurtled safely into the Alamo. He was reporting back, as he had promised, to his commanding officer. Bonham's act was a remarkable deed. He knew the desperate plight of those at the Alamo, and yet he went back. He went back to the Alamo because he believed in the cause of independence, and he must have known that he probably would die there. And yet Bonham rode back into the Alamo. A similar but even more remarkable situation we heard about in our processional gospel today. We heard about the events of that first Palm Sunday. Jesus rode into Jerusalem. People gathered around him and welcomed him. Some of the people put their cloaks on the road. Others cut branches from the trees and waved them in the air. Many were singing, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." With all these people cheering him on, Jesus entered Jerusalem. The most important event that day was also the most basic. Jesus entered Jerusalem. Why was that so important? Because, like Jim Bonham, Jesus knew that suffering and death awaited him in that city. And yet he rode into Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, Jesus would taste his Last Supper. In Jerusalem, Jesus would be betrayed by Judas. In Jerusalem, Jesus would be denied by Peter. In Jerusalem, Jesus would be arrested by soldiers. In Jerusalem, Jesus would be accused by religious leaders. In Jerusalem, Jesus would be severely whipped. In Jerusalem, he would be made to wear a crown of thorns. In Jerusalem, he would be forced to carry a cross. In Jerusalem, he would be crucified. In Jerusalem, he would die. Jesus knew what would happen to him in that city, and yet Jesus entered Jerusalem. What a powerful message this is for us today. Quite often when we go through difficult times, we might conclude that the sufferings in our life are an indication of God's absence. We might feel this way when we're dealing these days with the coronavirus pandemic. We might think that God is absent from us as we struggle with any suffering or difficulty. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Jesus was not above or distant from the suffering in the world. Last Sunday, we heard in our gospel reading how Jesus deliberately came to Bethany to grieve with Mary and Martha, whose brother had just died. And today we remember the first Palm Sunday. And Jesus deliberately and intentionally came into Jerusalem to suffer and die for our sake. And this Friday, Good Friday, we will ponder his suffering and death on a cross. All these events make it crystal clear. Jesus does not avoid suffering. Indeed, he deliberately enters right into the midst of suffering. So the most amazing part of the first Palm Sunday, not the palm branches, not the songs of Hosanna, not the humble donkey, not the cheers of the crowd, nor the cloaks placed in the pathway. The most amazing part about the first Palm Sunday was simply Jesus entered Jerusalem. We have many challenges and difficulties these days as we deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Do you think that Jesus will come to be with us in our difficulties? Or will he stay away? Hey, look down the road. Who is that coming towards us? Who is that riding on a donkey? Who is coming to be with us in this difficult time? Could Jesus be doing for us the same thing that he did on that first Palm Sunday? Jesus entered Jerusalem. Amen.